I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd investigate her own husband. But there I was sitting in my car outside Ryan's tech headquarters in San Francisco, staring at a job application confirmation email that had just turned my entire world upside down. My name is Maya Chen, and I'd been married to Ryan Park for 8 years. 8 years of what I thought was a solid partnership. Ryan was the founder and CEO of a rapidly growing tech startup called Nexus Analytics. When we met, he was just another ambitious programmer with big dreams. I was a marketing director at a mid-sized firm, pulling decent money and loving my work. We built our life together, or so I thought. 3 years into our marriage, Ryan's company started taking off. He was working 18-hour days, sleeping at the office more nights than not. When he asked if I'd consider stepping back from my career to manage our home life to be his anchor while he built something extraordinary, I said yes. I believed in him and I believed in us. That was 5 years ago. Now at 34, I was ready to return to the workforce. The truth was, I missed it. I missed the strategy sessions, the creative campaigns, and the thrill of a successful product launch. Ryan was hardly home anyway, and I'd grown tired of being alone in our expensive Pacific Heights apartment, playing the role of the supportive wife for a husband who barely remembered I existed. So I started applying to marketing positions. Then I saw a senior marketing manager position at Nexus Analytics. Ryan and I had always kept our professional lives separate. He'd made it clear early on that he didn't believe in mixing business with personal relationships. But something made me stop, and I submitted my application using my maiden name, Chen. The response came faster than I expected, an email from Jennifer Wu, head of human resources, asking me to come in for an interview. During the interview, Jennifer mentioned that their CEO was Ryan Park, but then she said something that made my stomach drop. She mentioned another Mrs. Park who already worked there as the head of operations. Her name was Sophia Park, and she reported directly to Ryan. Jennifer looked confused and asked if I said my husband was Ryan Park. When I confirmed we had been married for 8 years, she told me that Sophia Park was known at the company as Ryan's wife. I sat there in shock while Jennifer fled the room to check on something. My hands were shaking as I realized the affair had been going on for 3 years, and everyone at the company thought this other woman was his wife. I sat there alone, my mind racing. Mrs. Park, Sophia Park, head of operations, who reports directly to Ryan. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I opened LinkedIn and searched for Sophia Park at Nexus Analytics. Her profile loaded a beautiful woman in her early 30s, polished and confident. Her bio said she was passionate about scaling tech companies. I scrolled down and saw she had been at Nexus for 3 years. The affair had been going on for 3 years, right under my nose. I clicked through her posts and found photos from company events. There were pictures of her giving presentations and attending conferences. Then I found a photo from a company retreat 6 months ago. It was a casual shot on a beach, and there in the background was Sophia wearing a diamond bracelet I recognized immediately. I remembered when Ryan bought it 8 months ago. He had told me he was going to New York for a business trip, and when he came back, I found a receipt for $8,000 from Tiffany's. When I had asked him about it, he got defensive and snapped that it was a business gift for a CEO's wife who collected jewelry. He told me I wouldn't understand high-level business dealings, but there it was on Sophia's wrist in a company photo. I felt sick to my stomach. Jennifer returned to the conference room, and she wasn't alone. She brought David Chen, the CFO, with her. He was a tall man in his 50s, and he looked very grave. He used my maiden name and said we needed to talk. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. Apparently, everyone at Nexus knew Sophia as Mrs. Park. She attended every company event as Ryan's wife, and was even listed as his emergency contact. David had suspected something was wrong for months, because Sophia had access to company finances she shouldn't have had. He told me he had been gathering information because he suspected embezzlement, but he had no idea about me or the fact that Ryan was actually married to someone else. How is this possible? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I looked at Jennifer and David, trying to understand how a man could maintain such a massive deception for over 1,000 days. Jennifer and David exchanged a heavy look of shared realization. Jennifer explained carefully that Ryan had always told the staff I was incredibly private. He had built a narrative that I suffered from severe social anxiety, and that I preferred to avoid all corporate functions because of a past traumatic experience in the industry. He told them I wanted to keep my distance from his professional world entirely. I laughed a harsh and bitter sound because for years I had hosted elegant dinners for his colleagues at our home, and I had been a successful marketing director who presented to rooms of hundreds of people. Then David added the most painful detail of all. He told me that Ryan had informed Sophia that he and I were long since divorced. He claimed the split was amicable and that I had moved back to New York to pursue my own high-powered career. He told her I only kept his last name for professional consistency, which was his excuse for why Sophia couldn't legally use the name Park yet. The audacity and the sheer calculated manipulation of his words made the air in the room feel thin. I suddenly demanded to see the financial records. I told David that if my husband had been embezzling from this company to fund his affair with an employee he claimed was his wife, then I had a legal right to see what he had been doing with our marital assets. David hesitated for a moment, thinking about company confidentiality, but then he made a decision and turned his laptop toward me. What I saw over the next hour made me physically ill. Ryan hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been systematically stealing from his own company to fund a complete second life that mirrored our own. There was a luxury condo in Mission Bay listed under an anonymous LLC, but paid for entirely with company funds, disguised as corporate housing for visiting executives. There were records of first-class flights to Paris, Rome, and Tokyo, all charged as business development, but the dates perfectly matched Sophia's vacation days. I saw line items for designer clothes, and even a Tesla, all buried deep in various budget categories, where they wouldn't be easily noticed. The total amount of stolen funds came to nearly $2 million over the course of 3 years. I asked David why he hadn't gone to the board of Haas directors yet. He sighed tiredly and said he had tried 6 months ago, but Ryan was the founder and the majority shareholder. The board members were all his personal friends and people he had handpicked, so they dismissed David's concerns as professional jealousy. They believed David was simply threatened by Sophia's rapid success. I understood then that Ryan had built an empire of lies so comprehensive that even direct evidence couldn't penetrate it, but he had made one critical mistake by letting me apply to his company. I stood up from the conference table, feeling steadier than I had in years, despite the chaos swirling around me. I looked David and Jennifer in the eye and told them I needed copies of every single piece of evidence they had found. I wanted every receipt, every suspicious transaction, every credit card statement, and every internal email that mentioned Sophia or these hidden expenses. Jennifer asked me what I was going to do, and I told her that I was going to get justice and ensure that Ryan could never do this to anyone else. I left the Nexus Analytics building that day, carrying a thumb drive that contained the destruction of my marriage, but also the seeds of my future. I didn't go back to the Pacific Heights apartment where Ryan's lies were built into the very walls. Instead, I drove straight to the home of my old boss, Margaret Torres. Margaret had been my mentor when I was climbing the corporate ladder years ago, and she had been the only one to warn me about losing my identity in someone else's dreams when I chose to step back for Ryan's career. Now I sat in her kitchen while she poured us both wine and listened to the entire story from the job interview to the $2 million embezzlement. She told me immediately that I needed a lawyer who understood both marital law and corporate fraud, but I told her I needed something else first. I told her I needed a job because I refused to fight Ryan as a dependent housewife. I needed to be financially independent and fight him as a peer with my own money and my own position. Margaret smiled at me with a look of pure pride and asked if I was interested in the VP of marketing position at her company. 3 weeks later, I started my new role, and it felt like a part of my soul was finally waking up. In those 3 weeks, I didn't just start a job, I built a war room. I hired Rachel Morrison, who was known as the best divorce attorney in San Francisco for taking down untouchable men. I opened new bank accounts and credit cards in my maiden name Chen and had my half of our marital assets professionally evaluated by independent experts. I began a meticulous log of every night. Ryan came home late every business trip he took, and every time he mentioned Sophia's name without realizing the irony of his own betrayal. Rachel's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. We weren't going to confront Ryan in a screaming match at home, where he could gaslight me or hide more assets. Instead, we were going to let his own intricate web of lies slowly unravel him from the inside out. The first step was a psychological test. I asked Ryan to have dinner with me at the restaurant where we had our first date 8 years ago. Over wine and pasta, I acted the part of the supportive wife one last time, asking casual questions about work and how the new head of operations Sophia was doing. Ryan answered with a smooth, rehearsed confidence, telling me she was excellent and very capable. When I asked if they were too close, he stiffened, but said they simply worked well together. Then I dropped the hook. I told him I had been thinking about going back to work and maybe even applying at Nexus so I could see his world. He went pale and fumbled for his phone, claiming an emergency at work. He left me with the check, but I didn't mind because I knew I had finally rattled the man who thought he was a god. The second step of the plan required a level of patience I didn't know I possessed. Through my secret communications with David Chen, I learned that the Nexus Analytics Board of Directors had scheduled their critical quarterly review meeting for the following month. This was the moment we had been waiting for, as it was the only time all the major stakeholders and investors would be in one room. Rachel and I spent every night for 2 weeks preparing a document that was as cold and clinical as a surgical strike. We didn't just focus on the affair because we knew the board might dismiss that as a private matter. Instead, we focused on the betrayal of the shareholders. Our dossier was methodical and devastating, including every suspicious transaction with specific dates, amounts, and David's detailed financial analysis that proved the money had been siphoned from the marketing and operations budgets. We included high-resolution screenshots of Sophia's social media accounts, which showed her wearing expensive designer jewelry and vacationing at luxury resorts that perfectly matched the dates and locations of Ryan's business trips. We even included signed statements from 3 lower-level employees who had witnessed Ryan introducing Sophia as Mrs. Park at industry mixers. But the final piece of evidence was the one that would make the board unable to look away. David had managed to secure security footage from the Nexus parking garage that showed Ryan and Sophia arriving together in the early hours of the morning, looking disheveled more than a dozen times. The day before the board meeting, Rachel sent the entire document to every board member's personal email address. We purposefully avoided their company accounts to ensure Ryan and his IT department couldn't intercept or delete the files before they were read. To add another layer of pressure, we sent a redacted version of the findings to 3 prominent tech journalists who specialized in Silicon Valley scandals. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. At exactly 8:30, my phone began to ring incessantly. It was Ryan. I let it go to voicemail 5 times in 10 minutes, until finally I decided to answer. His voice was filled with a type of panic I had never heard in the 8 years of our marriage. "Maya," he whispered, sounding completely broken. "We need to talk, please. I can explain everything." I sat in my new office at Margaret's company, looking at the city skyline, and asked him calmly if he could explain how he had been living a double life for 3 years, while I sat at home. I asked if he could explain the $2 million he had embezzled to buy another woman's love while I was managing our household and sacrificing my own career. He started begging, then promising to end things with Sophia, promising to pay back the company, and offering to go to therapy. But I told him that what I wanted was a divorce and half of everything we had built together. I told him he hadn't just betrayed a wife, he had destroyed a company and himself in the process. I hung up the phone as he was still speaking, leaving him to face the board members who were already waiting for him with the evidence of his fraud in their hands. The board meeting was a bloodbath from what David later told me in confidence. Ryan had walked into that room expecting to discuss growth projections and market expansion, but instead he found a jury of his peers staring at him with expressions of pure ice. He tried to play his usual card of charismatic founder arrogance, attempting to deny everything and claiming the evidence was a collection of fabrications created by a scorned wife seeking petty revenge. But the numbers provided by David were impossible to argue with, and the emails were signed with Ryan's own digital footprint. The security footage was the final nail in the coffin. By noon, the man who had built Nexus Analytics was placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full forensic investigation, and the board voted unanimously to suspend his access to all company assets. By that evening, the story had already broken across the major tech news outlets, with headlines announcing that a rising Silicon Valley star was accused of massive embezzlement and fraud to fund a secret double life. The public humiliation was total, and the narrative Ryan had worked so hard to maintain collapsed in a single news cycle. By the end of that week, Sophia had resigned her position in disgrace. I actually felt a strange flash of pity for her when David showed me private emails between her and Ryan. It became clear that she had genuinely believed Ryan was a divorced man, and she had even asked him several times about meeting his ex-wife at charity events, only for Ryan to make up more lies about my supposed instability. She had been manipulated into his web, just like I had been, though her role was different. The legal proceedings for our divorce took 6 months, and they were a grueling test of endurance. Rachel was merciless in the courtroom. We documented every single lie, every stolen dollar, and every calculated manipulation. Ryan's lawyers tried to argue that I was only entitled to a standard division of assets, based on our initial years together. But Rachel counter-argued with brilliant precision. She argued that Ryan had systematically depleted our marital assets to fund his affair, and that the company he had built was legally partially mine, because I had supported him through the crucial early years by sacrificing my own high-earning potential. She proved that his fraud had damaged my own career path by convincing me to leave the workforce to be his anchor. The judge was a sharp woman who had no patience for Ryan's excuses, and she agreed with our assessment of the situation. In the final settlement, I was awarded our Pacific Heights apartment, half of Ryan's remaining liquid assets, and a structured settlement that would pay out a significant portion of his future earnings over the next 10 years. More importantly than the money, I felt the weight of the last 5 years finally lifting off my shoulders. I had my self-respect back, and for the first time in a long time, I could look in the mirror and see Maya Chen, the professional, not just the CEO's invisible wife. Ryan, on the other hand, faced a much darker future as the independent auditor turned over their findings to the authorities, and criminal charges for embezzlement began to loom over his head. As the dust began to settle from the divorce, I threw myself into my new role at Margaret's company with a passion I had forgotten I possessed. Margaret gave me real authority and real impact, and within a few months, I had rebuilt my professional network and started speaking at major marketing conferences again. I was proving to myself and the industry that I was far more than just the woman behind a successful man. I was a strategist, a leader, and a force to be reckoned with. I also began therapy to work through the years of gaslighting and the trauma of being made to feel like I was too sensitive or that I was imagining things. I was finally learning to trust my instincts again. Then, a year after the divorce was finalized, I received a phone call that I never could have predicted. It was David Chen. He had stayed in touch with me, and I was always grateful for the risk he took in helping me expose the truth. "Maya," he said, his voice sounding both excited and nervous, "I wanted you to hear this from me before it hits the news. The board has made a final decision about the permanent leadership for Nexus Analytics." I held my breath, for a second hoping they had finally given David the CEO position he deserved for keeping the company together during the scandal. But David surprised me by saying that they wanted me instead. I was completely stunned and told him it was impossible because I was just a marketing executive, and I already had a great position with Margaret. But David explained that he didn't want the top spot because his strengths were in finance and that he had been the one to champion me to the board. He told them about my background, my architectural vision for the brand, and how my personal story represented exactly what the company needed to become. He said I represented ethics, transparency, and resilience. He argued that it would be the ultimate act of justice for me to take over the company that had been partially built on my own sacrifice. I thought about the offer for 3 days without sleeping. The interview process that followed was the most rigorous of my life, as the board needed to be certain I wasn't just looking for another way to hurt Ryan. I had to present a comprehensive 5-year plan for rebuilding investor trust and creating a sustainable corporate culture that prioritized integrity over ego. I nailed every single meeting, showing them a level of preparation they had never seen from Ryan. 3 months later, I was officially named the CEO of Nexus Analytics. The tech press went wild with the news, calling it the ultimate revenge story. But I didn't see it that way. For me, it was the final step in reclaiming the life that had been stolen from me in that kitchen 5 years ago. My first day as CEO of Nexus Analytics was nothing like the day I walked in for that job interview. This time, I didn't need a visitor badge, and the receptionist stood up to greet me by name. I walked into the corner office that used to belong to the man who tried to erase me, and the first thing I did was open the blinds to let the light flood the room. I wasn't there for revenge, I was there to build something real. My first official act was to implement a strict ethics policy that included anonymous reporting for financial irregularities and mandatory training on workplace boundaries. I wanted to ensure that no one else could ever use this company as a personal playground for deception. My second act was perhaps the most controversial, but also the most necessary. I called Sophia Park and asked her to meet me at a quiet coffee shop far from the office. She was visibly shocked and terrified when I reached out, but I told her simply that she was good at her job. David had shown me her operational records, and despite the lies Ryan had told her, she had increased the company's efficiency by 30% and implemented systems that were still holding the place together. I told her that she was a victim of Ryan's manipulation just as I was, and I offered her her old job back as head of operations. We sat there for 2 hours crying and talking about how Ryan had isolated both of us and made us doubt our own sanity. She eventually accepted, and her return helped heal the fractured culture of the company. 2 years later, Nexus Analytics went public, and the IPO was more successful than anyone had projected. I stood on the floor of the stock exchange, surrounded by the people who truly believed in me. David Chen, who remained my loyal CFO, Margaret Torres, who cheered from the front row, and Sophia, who had become a trusted colleague. Standing beside me was James, a man I had met a year after my divorce. He was a VP at a gaming company who respected my ambition and never felt threatened by my success. He held my hand as the opening bell rang, and I realized that I had finally built a life based on mutual respect and honesty, rather than a transactional lie. Ryan was a distant memory now, having served his probation and living a quiet life, far from the tech world he once dominated. His reputation was a cautionary tale, but mine was a blueprint for survival. I thought back to that woman sitting in the conference room hearing the name Mrs. Park and feeling like the world was ending. I realized then that Ryan had tried to make me invisible, but in doing so, he had inadvertently made me unstoppable. I had gone to Nexus looking for a job, but I had found my power instead. I was no longer the wife of a CEO. I was the architect of my own destiny, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be.